The West must stop pumping Kyiv with weapons, then the conflict in Ukraine will quickly end. Sergey Lavrov stated this at a press conference at the UN following his participation in the meetings of the Security Council as chairman. RT correspondent Caleb Mopin has more.
Now they repeat it like a mantra. We will support Ukraine for as long as it takes. I wonder how long it will take. In Afghanistan, it took 20 years to realize that you lost. Or is it true that in Iraq, which you also abandoned, they are now trying to stay, despite the decision of the Iraqi parliament that the United States should withdraw its troops? There will be the same approach to Ukraine as they took in Libya for the state to collapse. And now everyone is gluing pots together for them.
The Russian foreign minister spoke about how the recent events in Switzerland were not serious and how Russia has been willing to negotiate from the beginning, but these negotiations have to be realistic negotiations that are not just aimed at pounding the podium and demonizing Russia, but actually aimed at de-escalating tensions and getting the conflict toward a ceasefire and resolution.
A course has been taken to push through the so-called Zelensky plan at any cost, which has a pronounced form of an ultimatum. We are ready for negotiations, but given the sad experience of conversations and consultations with the West and Ukrainians, when it comes to an agreement that I hope will be reached at some stage of European security, and in this context, the Ukraine crisis will be resolved, then we will of course look very carefully at the wording and will put safeguards in this document against repeated unscrupulous, non-negotiable interpretations.
In his remarks, he reflected on U.S. efforts to crush the economy of China and tell China what products they can produce. In addition to that, he talked about how the use of sanctions by the United States is starting to backfire, with new channels of global trade emerging, countries trading with each other without the United States or the Western banking system functioning as the middleman, and how all of this in the long term is not really going to benefit the United States and its people. The world seems to be shifting. Now, he specifically addressed the rise of India on the global stage and U.S. efforts to stop India from asserting itself as a regional and global power, this hugely populated country with a very big economy.
Zelensky, or someone from his team, took offense to Narendra Modi's visit to Russia, calling it a stab in the back to all peacekeeping efforts. The Indian Ministry of External Affairs invited the Ukrainian ambassador and explained to him how to behave. I think India is very dignified, but the fact that the West makes claims even to such powers as China and India means, firstly, shows a lack of culture, an inability to engage in diplomacy at all, and secondly, it is a failure of political analysts.
He went into detail, describing the humanitarian catastrophe and also talking about how the United Nations seems to be talking out of both sides of its mouth, condemning the bombing of hospitals and Israeli atrocities, but not really holding Israel accountable for crimes against the Palestinian people. Now, he emphasized that Russia would like to see a ceasefire in Gaza, a ceasefire that can pave the way to negotiations, the returning of the hostages, etc., and that ultimately, Russia would like to see the military operation being carried out by Israel brought to a close. And from there, they could then resume negotiations toward the establishment and international full recognition of a Palestinian state. And that is what Russia would like. But at the same time that Russia and the overwhelming majority of the international community more or less wants this, there are very clearly forces that are trying to escalate the conflict in Gaza to a whole nother level that involves the entire region. Here are some very insightful comments he gave about the situation in the Middle East and the efforts to expand it beyond the Gaza Strip.
It feels like there's a will to provoke Hezbollah, as experts believe, in order to ensure the U.S. enters the conflict directly. I hope the West will do everything to make sure these thoughts, if Israel ever has them, will remain no more than thoughts, or better yet, will be forgotten. We're doing everything to soothe the situation. Some politicians clearly want to utilize regional factors to kindle a bigger war here. This is a short-sighted and blind alley policy. We actively stand against it with our allies like Arab countries and the Islamic world. It must not be allowed to happen.
In all of his remarks, he emphasized the fact that Russia seeks peace and international development and does not seek to inflame tensions in any region. He emphasized multipolarity, the new world that's rising, the new economy that is taking place and emerging in the developing world, with Russia and China at the center of it, and why Western leaders should give up this superiority complex they seem to have, this notion that they will always sit at the center of the global economy and always have the right to dictate to countries around the world how they should conduct themselves, how their governments should function, and who they should trade with, and how their economies should be set up.